So in this video, we're going to take a look at lights and cameras. I'm going to start here in Maya just to give you an idea. If I come under rendering, there are a lot of different lights. Now, not all of these work exactly the way you would expect them to with the current render because of the switch from Mental Ray to Arnold. So even under Arnold, there's some specialty lights that can be used now. But I just want you to get the idea of that there are specific types of lights and they have different functions and purposes. For example, this directional light, as I clicked on it up here to create it, you can also go create lights and select one of the lights. Within Maya, acts as the sun. In the same way, the directional light in Unity, if I come to the scene and select the light, acts as the sun, where it's a light source that goes in a single direction infinitely. So as I rotate this around, you can see it updating on the fly here in Unity. In the same way, in Maya, as I move this around, currently I'm not seeing anything. So this is where I go back to the number keys. 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 is shaded with texture, 7 is shaded, texture, and lit. Not all the lights will show up in this. Some of them will not show up until you do a render, but yet again, that would need to become part of your pipeline and process. But the lights can also be interacted with in pretty significant ways. If I hit the S key here, come to frame 24 and rotate it to there, hit S, now I can animate this light's movement. And so you can see it's moving across the surface. In the same way, I can set up cameras, and I'll hit the 6 key now that there's no light in the scene. I can set up cameras within Maya or within any other rendering engine or game engine to do different functions as well. So for example, I can go to create camera, and here's this new camera. If I want to do something with it, I can actually look through the camera itself, and there's a couple ways to do this. One, I can also start by changing the name. So this will be fly camera or whatever else I want to call it, so it's easier to identify. But I can either come up here to look through selected with the camera selected, or under perspective go, hey, there's the fly camera, and I can move around. And then if I want to have this in a specific spot, I can make changes by going back to the other perspective camera and then do what I need to. So for this, I'll show you very quickly. I can do fly camera. At frame 1, hit S. Frame 24, I'm going to zoom in here so that's right up here, S. Frame 48, it's going to come right around here to the back, S. And so now I can get this kind of like fly through with the camera. If I want to look at it from a different perspective, look at the perspective, and then just watch the motion of that camera. So you can see there's a lot of different ways to interact with these environments, with these worlds, based on the software that you're using, but they all kind of tie in together. So that's lights and camera. So let's take a look in Unity at some of these things. So once again, I have currently just a directional light, but I can add in other types of lights to get different effects within this environment. And so what I can do is I can create light, and with Unity I'm focused mainly on these 4, directional, point, spotlight, area light, but they have different purposes. Directional light, once again, this would be for like an exterior scene where you have sunlight hitting, for something that might be more of an interior scene, and I'll actually just uncheck this right now. Let me go to game object light. I would do like a point light, and this point light affects a specific area, and then as I increase the scale of the area, you see that it has different effects. So now if I go and hit play, there's the light right there. And I can adjust the color, so I can make that different hues. I can play around with that. I can increase or decrease the intensity. So I can make that really powerful. I can lower that down so it's a little bit less powerful. I can do duplicate that and get a second one over here. And I'd encourage you just to play around with the lights, just so you can get used to what each of the different lights does and how it reacts in the environment. So that's kind of my rule of thumb for anything, if you've noticed, that you play around with it. The more you play around with it, the more you get used to it. So I encourage you to play around with the different lights and see what it is you can come up with. So maybe a spotlight over here. You know, and play around with other things. And you can also do things like animating them, just as you can within Unity, or excuse me, within Maya. So once again, to do that, I'm going to come up here to Window, Animation, and I'm going to drop this down here next to the console so I've got easier access. I'm going to create a new animation. So with that light selected, it's telling me where I can put it. So here under the Maya Stuff Models, I'm just going to store it here. This will be Light Animation, and save it. And I will hit record right here. And I'm going to adjust one of the settings. So for example, I can play with this intensity. So I'm going to go 0.4. And you see that there's little keyframes that showed up here. I can then drag out to 30. And I'm going to change that intensity to 6. Come back here to remember. So that was 0.4. Come to the minute. And I'll change that to 0.4. Well, now I have an animation of the light adjusting. I could also change the direction, so I can grab the directional light, have it rotate across, and make adjustments that way. I can also start playing with different cameras. So for example, here's the main camera. I can create a new animation for this, call this camera animation, and hit save. And I can set it up to do a fly-through. So rotate this, and with the camera selected, you can see that there's the camera preview, but I can hit record. And once again, just using the QWERTY keys, move, rotate, scale, I'll start it there. And over here at a minute, I will have it on this side and rotated to look back, if I can rotate it correctly. Here, I'll just do it this way. Rotate in a single direction. All right, and so now if I hit play, I can see that camera moving across, and then all I would need to do is call that camera. So if I actually change it where I turn off this first person controller, well, now it's going to rely on this main camera for the gameplay. So if I hit play, it's got this fly-through going on. So hopefully you're getting the idea of some of the things that you can do. For right now, I'm not going to worry too much more. I just wanted to show you that these things are all possible. So this is how you can do fly-throughs within the game and then programmatically say which camera to use or select at any given time. You can adjust lights. You can animate and move around pretty much anything that you need to. And so within a scene, once I'm happy with it, once I've gotten in my lights, I've got my cameras and the characters, and I'll bring this back. I can also do one more thing, and that's something that's called post-processing effects. Now this is a little bit more advanced, but it has a really important role to play. So if I hit play, right now these look a certain way. But this is a single render pass. And so a post-process is when you have additional render passes that have an effect on the camera or the game somehow. So in order to do this, I'm going to add a component, and that will be effects. Excuse me, actually before I do that, let me jump over here to the one that actually has the camera on it. And also with it, I don't want, excuse me, it's not in effects just yet. I need to actually download the post-processing stack to be able to use it correctly. So in order to do that, I can come to Window, and let me come up to right here to the Assets Store. And in the Assets Store, I can grab the Post-Processing stack. And this comes free, so I can just download that. And I'm just going to skip the sign in because it's a free asset. Okay, and I ended up pausing it because it did force me to sign in now. So I signed in, and once again, this is free though, so if you want to do that, set up a Unity account and then sign in. But when I hit download, I accept, it does the download, and just like bringing in the standard assets, it's going to download a package. And so I can go, select all, hit import. And I will pause this while we wait for it to import the rest of the way. All right, so now that it's imported, so once again, you go to the asset store, download, import it, and you'll have to log in for that. Then I can start actually making some adjustments. So on this first person controller, I will go down to add component. And now under effects, there is post-processing behavior. And so you can, and let me undo that because I put it on the wrong one again. So under the first-person controller with first-person character where the camera is, then affects post-processing behavior. And then I just need to create a post-processing profile that I will attach into it. So to do that, I can go anywhere under my assets and create it. So I'll right-click, create, and then right here, sorry, I just lost that again. So create right there, post-processing profile. And I will call this level test post. And so this allows me to do quite a few different things. In order to show that, once again, I'll come over here and select that level test post. It's not grabbing it from right there, so I will just simply drag that into place. So left click and drag. So now with this in place, as I select that level test, I can start making changes and watch how much this is going to change. So I select right here, I will put on ambient occlusion, and it's a minor change right now that you may or may not be seeing. So let me make some of these very obvious. So if I increase that, anywhere there's edges or where there's dips within the geometry, it creates that shading information. So especially there on that table, watch the effect that that has. I can play with depth of field. So I can increase or decrease that so it's very obvious. I can also change the focus distance. I can get motion blur in here. I can create bloom. And there's all these other things that you can play with to get a specific style or effect. And so this goes along with your lighting. So even with the color grading, I may want to increase my saturation. Change some of these other things to change the look. And so now when I go in to play the game, you see that it gets a very different look than it did without those post-processing effects. So let me play with a couple more things on here, but this is just something for you to try out. So for example, I can add some grain in here and adjust kind of how the filmic grain goes to get a specific effect. And there are a lot of other things that you can play with. I'm actually going to turn that one off, maybe put on a vignette. But this is something that attaches to the camera and helps change the overall feel of the final product. So with that, now that I've added in some lights, I've shown you how you can animate a camera in here, and I've played around with the effect of the camera by adding in the post-processing effect, I'm now going to save it and do one final build to show you just some of these new changes that were implemented. So File, Build Settings, and I've got everything left the same as I did from the last module, and I can go Build, and right here 3D Model Build, Save, and I do want to replace it, or I can do it as a standalone build with a new name or in a new location. But I'm going to pause it while it does the build, and then we'll test it out. Alright, so it finally finished the build. So now I'll open it up and we can take a look at it. So now even with just the few changes that were made, so adding in some lights and also adding in the post-processing effects, you can see what a difference this is from the build that was done in the previous module. Now, what you've learned so far is the core pipeline for 3D content creation. This obviously is not everything, but this gets you those basic foundations that you can now use and build upon. And now it's just delving into each of the individual skill sets. So advancing modeling abilities, UV mapping, the texturing abilities, going into multiple types of textures, normal maps, specular maps, using alpha channels, things like that. Advancing rigging as well as animation, and then even with the implementation, potentially learning more about ways that it can be implemented, picking up some programming, things like that. But what you have now is the fundamental knowledge for everything you need to be able to get started and go through the basic steps of the 3D content creation pipeline. So I hope you enjoyed this series. And if you're not already a student watching these, I encourage you to come down and check out the courses that we offer at Columbus State so we can help advance your knowledge even further. Thank you very much. Bye.